Before the United States, before Jamestown, before Plymouth, there was St. Augustine. Founded by Spain in 1565, it is the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the continental United States. Its story begins with a fight for Florida, as I learned on a walk there with local history professor Justin Lawson.
In September 1565, Spanish explorer Pedro Menéndez de Avilés came to this port. He was actually running away from a guy named Ribault, and over a period of a few weeks, the two men will have a showdown.
Menéndez had been sent by King Philip II of Spain to remove a French colony at Fort Caroline near present-day Jacksonville. To stave him off, the French sent Jean Ribault and a fleet of ships packed with troops.
The two men essentially left at the same time from the respective coasts, came on the same winds, and at this inlet here is where Menéndez escapes from Ribault and kind of gains the upper hand. And this is the St. Augustine Inlet.
This calm-looking stretch of water hides a danger. It is perilously shallow and only safely passable at high tide. Still, Menéndez rolls the dice.
Menéndez takes the risky venture across. Ribault does not. He's got much larger ships with a bigger crew, and so they anchor out there and they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and a hurricane comes along. Takes Ribault, sends him down to Cape Canaveral where they shipwreck.
With the French fleet broken by the storm, Menéndez sees his opening.
He says, you know what? I bet Fort Caroline is undefended right now. We should march up there on foot. And it's about 40 miles from here, through a hurricane, in the swamps. They camp out, and the next morning they go in and they kill 200-something people hand to hand. They end up securing the fort.
Meanwhile, Ribault's shipwrecked survivors were trying to make their way back up the coast to Fort Caroline, unaware that it had already fallen into Spanish hands. At an inlet just south of St. Augustine, they encounter Menéndez and his men. The hungry, exhausted French surrender, but Menéndez orders almost all of them executed, including Ribault. Today, this place is known as Matanzas, Spanish for slaughters. Over the course of a few violent weeks, St. Augustine had gone from a precarious landing to Spain's permanent foothold in Florida. This first settlement is commemorated at Mission Nombre de Dios, where Menéndez's chaplain led a mass of Thanksgiving in 1565 and afterward invited the local Saloy First Peoples to share a feast. This was the beginning of permanent Catholic parish life in the continental U.S.
From 1566 to 1573, this is a really struggling colony. They will be on the island a little bit, then they move. The Queen goes, hey, you guys need to follow something called the Law of the Indies, which is a requirement for every Spanish city to set up in a certain way, with a plaza and a church and an appropriate orientation, and that's where we get this plaza, which is still in here today. So we're approaching the north end of St. George Street, and this actually would have been the north boundary of the old city as well. Straight ahead of us, you can see the city gates. And those city gates were built a little bit later, and they've been preserved. But every night, those gates would have closed, and if you were stuck outside, they didn't open. Along this line were giant earthenwork mounds that were called the Cubo Line, the Santo Domingo Line. Once the fort is built and opened by 1700, the city is safe.
The key to the fort's durability is coquina, a local stone formed from layers of seashells compressed over hundreds of thousands of years.
You can't burn coquina, though.
No, can't burn it. It's strong, but it's kind of soft, so a cannon shot is just going to sort of mold into it. It doesn't break it, it doesn't knock it off.
Just north of the old city is Fort Mose. In 1738, Spanish Florida chartered it for runaways escaping slavery in English colonies, becoming the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in what is now the United States. For generations, the same wetlands and waterways that helped protect St. Augustine also made overland travel slow and difficult. But by the 1880s, railroads began collapsing that distance. One of the first men to travel here by steam train had a vision for what this place could become, and he could make it happen because he was one of the most powerful industrialists in America.
Getting interior from here, it's all swamp. You're not going anywhere, right? Unless you have a small canoe and you know the land, you know where you're going. And so the city just kind of gets stuck here. But as Henry Flagler comes in and the city is developing into a tourist mecca, a Newport of the South, as Mr. Flagler would like it to be, and really just a place for people who were looking to escape cities, get away from cold winters. Major tuberculosis recovery center here prior to Henry Flagler. But one of the things that you did when you were a wealthy tourist in 1890 was, if you weren't eating, you were probably out strolling along this bayfront. There's a man named Dr. Andrew Anderson II, and he was one of Henry Flagler's closest associates here in the city. After Flagler moves on to Miami and Key West and points south, Dr. Andrew Anderson II, who was born here in St. Augustine and lived here and helped organize the construction and oversight of the Ponce de Leon Hotel here, he's going to be instrumental in developing this into an early highway. And so by the 1920s, getting to St. Augustine by car is actually relatively normal. It's pretty ahead of its time. And if you want to connect more to America 250, for me, this city in general really represents the best of public-private partnership. This city has really survived all the way up until Henry Flagler on government support. If it hadn't been for the fort providing jobs and money, and for the Spanish providing an annual or quarterly situado, which provided food, there would have probably never been a long-staying economy. But when Henry Flagler and other entrepreneurs come in the 1880s and really start to develop, they do it alongside the government, which is willing to make concessions like improving infrastructure, developing better roads and systems, and using tourist income from other areas to both fund Flagler's enterprises, but also to fund the city. Interviews with people who lived here, even in the 40s and 50s when the hotel was still operating, people who live in Lincolnville, they would have gardens in their yard, and they would have contracts with the hotel to sell 100 heads of lettuce a season, or however many they had. That was really Flagler's spirit. He was an entrepreneur, but he was a philanthropist as well. He believed if he built the infrastructure, if he built the trains, he would create markets for farmers in the south of Florida to ship produce to the north and just create a total improvement in everybody's quality of life. From those farmers in Fellsmere, Florida, to those people in New York who really want oranges and extra access to fresh foods and vegetables in a time when, about Upton Sinclair and the jungle and the FDA and whatnot. It was a time of not really the cleanest food and water for a lot of people.
Henry Flagler transformed St. Augustine into a luxury destination by building one of the grandest hotels of the age.
Flagler's jewel is the Hotel Ponce de Leon, and it's constructed by some guys named Carrera and Hastings. Famous architects designed the New York Public Library and Senate offices in DC. Rooms at the Ponce de Leon were anywhere from $5 to $90 a night, and when you booked a room, you had to book for the full season. So all of this was designed in a Spanish Renaissance style. That wasn't really the way the city looked at the time. It was just the way that they envisioned the city and being in a grand state. It was the most luxurious place. They ate so much food, huge meals, so many courses. Eating was an event. That was what you did. You got up, you got dressed, you came down, you ate a huge meal, and then you might just come sit around. You might go walk around, you might go to the shops, and then you would do that 3 times a day, and then at the end of the night you would dance. Yeah, you're having the great moment, right? People would walk in and they would be like, oh, wow, look at this place. It's so perfect, right? And one of the intentional designs is that down here on the floor is a missing white tile because it was a nod to, perfection of God, and that this building is not as perfect as God is. And so you would stand on this imperfection and you would say, look at how beautiful, it's perfect. And they would go, ah, ah, ah. This is the largest collection of Tiffany glass in the world. This hotel had electricity before the White House did. So it had early Edison electricity all throughout the hotel. This is where staff would have lived and worked. Segregated staffing, not just by race, but by gender too.
The hotel sold visitors an old world fantasy, but the buildings themselves relied on a new technology, poured concrete. In St. Augustine, that method had been pioneered by amateur architect Franklin Smith at his residence Villa Zorayda, right across the street from where Flagler would build his epic hotel.
That was the first poured concrete building in America. He was a huge dreamer, and he moved down here to St. Augustine and fell in love with the town, and he made this poured concrete structure where he took the coquina and he ground it up, and then he mixed it with water and some lime, and he got concrete. And the way that they would pour the concrete is they would set up 2 boards across from each other, and they would pour the wet concrete into those boards, and they would let it harden for 1 or 2 days, and then they would move the boards up. We can walk over and take a look at some of these buildings and see some of the neat parts of this.
That's not too different from how they pour concrete.
No, it's really not. And so about every 12 to 16 inches, you can see these cracks that represented the pour lines on these buildings. There's a lot of concrete science that comes out of St. Augustine that really spreads across the country and the world.
The Ponce became the first major poured concrete building in the United States. Once you know where to look, St. Augustine starts revealing historic layers at every turn.
Yeah, again, cracker house in front of us. That's what the house would have been called, the style. They called that due to the, cracking of the whips of the cattlemen. That's really what St. Augustine's known for in the Civil War and in Florida during that time, was interior food, interior cattle. During the Civil War, there was a huge blockade on Texas and Western cattle for the Confederacy. And so the Confederate states needed food. And rounding up old leftover Spanish cattle from central and interior Florida was the racket. And so if you were an able-bodied man anywhere in Florida during the Civil War, if you weren't fighting, you were authorized by the government to round up cattle. So they call these cracker homes because it's just a wooden batten house, and that's really the style that most Florida and really American homes are going to have. St. Augustine's super unique in that we have this coquina block available. But this building here, how it's got a coquina bottom and a wood top, that lets you know that it was probably built during the first Spanish period. And then when the British come in, they add the second story wood, because for them, they're used to going up and they're used to working with wood as a material.
On the other side of the city, a short walk down historic Avilés Street brings you to the González Álvarez house, the oldest surviving Spanish colonial residence in Florida, dating to the early 1700s. 2 centuries later, in the summer of 1964, at the height of the national struggle for civil rights, highly segregated St. Augustine took center stage. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference came to the city to work with local leaders to fight for desegregation. They based their operations here, in the historically black neighborhood of Lincolnville. One night, a drive-by shooter sprayed King's unoccupied rental home with bullets. On June 11th, King was arrested and jailed for attempting to sit down for a meal at St. Augustine's Monson Motor Lodge. The following week, protesters returned for a swim-in at the same hotel. Journalists watched as its manager poured acid into the pool. The story shocked the country, and the very next day the U.S. Senate passed the landmark Civil Rights Act, which President Lyndon Johnson signed into law, officially outlawing segregation and discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in the United States. So what is St. Augustine? It's not just America's oldest city. It's a place where this country's deeper origins are visible everywhere. Spanish Empire, military survival, Black freedom, Gilded Age opulence, and the long struggle over civil rights. Thanks to Justin Lawson of Flagler College for the awesome tour. For a more immersive version, my full walkthrough edit goes into a lot more depth, and I've linked it below. TDC members get early access to full walkthroughs like this as a special thank you for helping make these episodes possible. Until the next one, for TDC, I'm Bryce Plank.